Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to CSIS. Thanks for coming out on a day when Washington is paralyzed by fear of incoming storms, which I don't get it. It's going to be 40 tomorrow and they're worried about snow. But my name's Jim Lewis. Thank you for attending this morning. We're going to have a great discussion. This is part of a larger project that CSIS has been doing for about 6 months now. It has a few more months, 6 more months to run. It's a project looking at innovation in China and at a variety of sectors, including aerospace, artificial intelligence, self-driving cars and automobiles, semiconductors, and of course today, the internet. And as most of you know, the internet economy in China is truly innovative and dynamic. I won't say a lot more on that since we're going to have a whole panel on it. The way it will work today is Sam Sachs, a senior fellow in the technology program here at CSIS, will moderate the discussion and introduce the speakers. So Sam, why don't I turn it over to you?
Great. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
I'm really excited about the group that we have together today for the conversation. You know, when I was thinking about who I wanted to come and be on the panel, I wanted to bring together people that are really at the front lines of the internet sector and China's digital economy, but are also really driving the future and shaping the next generation for the internet. So I want to start with the person that's come the furthest, Ding Xianfeng, who is the chief scientist for IoT at Alibaba. We're really fortunate to get to have him here. And actually, he hosted myself and Paul in Hangzhou at Alibaba's headquarters just last month. Tonight, if you want to hear the Chinese version of this talk and learn more about China's IoT, you can come back from 6 to 7, and we'll be doing that. We also have, as I said, Paul Triolo, the practice head for geotechnology at Eurasia Group. You guys may not know this, but Paul was a star basketball player in college and actually played basketball on the Alibaba basketball court in Hangzhou when we were all last together last month. We have Kaiser Guo, who founded the Sinica podcast and also was at Baidu as the head of communications during a really critical time in the development of China's mobile internet, so has some great perspectives from the trenches of Baidu. It was also really important to have people here who could talk about emerging companies in China. It's not just the big Chinese internet companies that we hear the most about in the news, but there are some really dynamic companies that are just coming on the scenes and also are really shaping things in other sectors. So I wanted to have someone from the VC world. Hans Tung is the managing director at GGV Capital and was also one of the early investors in Alibaba back in 2003 when Alibaba, believe it or not, was considered sort of an emerging controversial player. And we also have David London, who is the head of government affairs for North America from OFO. When OFO bikes came to DC, I don't think a lot of people even realized that OFO was a Chinese company. And now the phenomenon of dockless bike sharing has spread around the world. So let's get into the discussion. I will lead with some moderated questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So I wanted to ask Paul Triolo to kick us off here. As an industry expert that's been watching the internet in China develop for several decades and was actually one of the first people from the US to be using the internet in China when it first became a thing. Paul, can you tell us, let's set the stage, tell us about the digital economy in China. You know, help us kind of cut through the noise. I think there's been a lot of buzz around the digital economy in China. What does this really mean? Why is there so much emphasis on this now? And you just got back from a recent trip to China where you were at the World Internet Conference in Wuzhen. You know, what can you tell us to help sort of kick off the conversation?
Wow, that's a tall order.
I know.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me, and I'm very honored to be among such a august guest here on the panel, and I look forward to a great discussion. So I think the digital economy is one of these terms that it kind of means everything and nothing. So I think one way to think about it is in China, I think it's a term that's come into use, I think, more or less in the last more so in the last 2 years. And previously, China had talked, there was a lot of talk about informatization and terms like that, and the fusion of industrialization and informatization. I think digital economy is a really nice term that captures now, for the Chinese leadership, a lot of really critical areas. And for example, so we saw in the Party Congress in October, Xi Jinping put ICT technologies and the digital economy in the forefront. So I think, and this continued at Wuzhen, the whole theme of Wuzhen was the digital economy. So I think the term for China captures a lot of the key sectors and areas that are really central to the growth and innovation in the new economy. So for example, this morning, if the weather had been better, I would have jumped on an Ofo bike or a mobike and come over here. I have an app on my phone, and I could have easily used it, and that's part of the innovation we'll talk about today. But I think it's also important to note that there are there's a whole range of technologies that are in the mix here: artificial intelligence, big data, cloud computing. I think we'll talk a little bit later about this, but Xi Jinping has we talked about this morning, has placed the new city of Xiong'an at the center in the sense of sort of a future-oriented growth of the digital economy. So Xiong'an will be a showcase. This is a new city south of Beijing. Will be a showcase for all these digital economy technologies, including things like autonomous vehicles, and again, cloud services, AI, blockchain. So I think digital economy is really an exciting term that captures a lot of the innovation and the vibrancy of the Chinese internet sector. And so I look forward to further discussion as we sort of flesh out the term going forward.
Thanks. And I wanted to actually ask Shenfang, can you talk about IoT specifically, and what does the IoT landscape in China look like? How is Alibaba thinking about IoT and what comes next?
Yeah, so actually IoT is Internet of Things. Actually, digital economy is a much bigger view of the term than the digital IoT. So the IoT actually means a lot of people don't know what to do with it. Why do IoT? IoT actually is digitize the entire physical world. The humankind we today, we already digitize all the knowledge on the paper into the internet world. But now we want to jump over the human, cognitive process. So all the knowledge is the result of the human cognitive process. So Einstein, come up with all the E equal to mc squared. So the theories, it's because that's the cognitive process of the result of the Einsteins. So what the IoT does is mapping the whole entire physical world into the digital world. Then we're using compute to mining those new theory, the new findings. So, and actually, the IoT in China is really hot. Actually, there is probably more than I will go into the CES, and there is a 480 company doing the IoTs in Shenzhen alone. We have 2,000 companies in the Shenzhen alone in the IoT association. So and Beijing, Shanghai, so there is more sensors. Today, if we look at the digital device we carry with us, the mobile phone or smartphones. But what if we put all the electronic device on every single thing? We can put electronic device, RFID on this bottle, and also we can put RFID in this cup. So in the physical world, this thing and this thing do not talk to each other physically, right? But what if I map into the digital, map into the cloud? They naturally talk into each other. Why? Because it's just 2 segments of memory. It's in 1 segment of compute and the 2 memory point, right? So it's physically easily to communicate each other. So the Internet of Things, so if we digitize the whole physical world and put all the electronics on every single thing, we create 1 trillion devices instead of the 2 billion devices. We will growing more than 100 times in shipping of the electronic devices. And also we're growing more than 100 times data generating. And all the data we're generating on this mobile phone and we consume on this mobile phone is human generating data, user generated, UGC, user generated. But what if we put the electronic or sensing or tag on this every physical thing? Then will be the machine generating data, MGC. The data will be more than 100 times bigger, and the knowledge mining, we sort of say the data mining, the come up with the new knowledge will be more than 100 times, and all fully automated. And think again, really important things to think again. Einstein and Newton and all those scientists are really difficult to find. But what if we put the whole physical world onto the digital world? Let the machine do the same work of the Einstein. Machine do the same work of the Newton. Then we can enable millions of people become Einstein.
You gave us a really clear description of it when we were with you in Hangzhou last month, and we were talking about the Chinese strategy known as Internet Plus, and you had a great description. You said, think about it like the brain and the nerves. And the brain, we have artificial intelligence, big data, and cloud, and IoT is the nerve, and it's everything that it touches. Kaiser, can you talk a bit about what you saw when you were at Baidu? And you were really in the trenches and had incredible access. What were some of the things that you saw Baidu doing really well? What were some of the challenges that Baidu had as they were really at the sort of tipping point of this mobile internet phenomenon in China?
I came on at a time when it was in the immediate aftermath of the Google pullout from China. So Google, David Drummond wrote his famous letter, his email on January 9th, and I joined just a couple of months later. And it was in large part, they wanted to bring somebody on who was going to be able to sort of handle that inevitable kind of criticism that Baidu would fall under. To be honest, initially it was fairly simple. I had a lot of there were some secular shifts underway that really helped. I think the big issue of internet censorship was shifting off of search engines. I mean, after all, if you're a search company, somebody searches for something that you don't want, the government doesn't want you to see, and what are you going to do? Are you going to maybe put it in an email and send it to a couple of friends? That wasn't the choke point anymore. The choke point that the government was worried about was social media by that point. So that onus really shifted off. I had a couple of years there where I think that because of the Google pullout, things were frankly too easy. Baidu was able to really sort of beat its own guidance in many consecutive quarters in 2010, 2011. There was a real complacency that had set in, and I think there was an awareness of it and no real ability to do anything about it. And part of that was because Baidu had a very different culture than Alibaba, a very different culture than Tencent. It certainly didn't have that sort of ruthlessness that Tencent had. It wasn't a product company par excellence like Tencent was, or an operations company like Alibaba was. It was a technology company, and to a fault, I think it was. But as a technology company, it missed a lot of really important shifts. It was laid out the gate. There's just no way to deny that it was laid out the gate, getting on board with mobile, with things like payments. It didn't see these things coming and wasn't able to respond quickly. So by 2012, there was a real crisis, and it took some time. But then Baidu really, I think it started catching up in an important way. It placed so much emphasis. It was really prescient, I think, more than the other two in BAT. Recognizing the importance of AI and especially of deep learning, invested heavily in that, brought on real rock stars of the industry in AI, and it's still, at least in terms of sort of, let's call it basic research of AI, it's really out there. I think the problem that it faces is that its data, search data, map data, things like that, arguably isn't as valuable as the data that you generate at Alibaba, the actual consumer data, or even the data that a super app like Weixin, WeChat actually generates. So while it has tremendous rockets, maybe its rocket fuel is not of as quite a high octane level.
I definitely want to get back to this data point because I think that there's a lot we have to talk about related to issues on data. But before I do, I wanted to just press you on one point. There are people that say that Baidu wouldn't have succeeded at all if Google hadn't have left China. What do you
I
think?
think that's nonsense. Look, I have no more dog in this fight. But I think just the simple objective truth. If you go back to 2000, you go back to the year that Google entered China in 2006. I mean, its market share was already very poor. It didn't really climb appreciably. It wasn't able to move the needle against Baidu, even when it was fighting on a level playing field, when it was under the same censorship rules. This is often said that censorship was effectively was actually intended as a form of protectionism. That is not the case. It was protectionist as a collateral effect, but that was not its intention. And if you look at in any category of internet companies, especially say consumer internet companies, whether it's in social media, in e-commerce, if you look at video, any of these things, the category competitors that came from the United States when they were not blocked, when Twitter was not blocked, when YouTube was not blocked, when Facebook was not blocked, when Google was not blocked, they were distant also-rans behind the Chinese companies in the absence of any censorship. It's simply not the case.
You've heard it here. I want to shift the conversation to talk about some of the emerging companies. And as many of you know, the venture capital landscape in China is extremely dynamic. Entrepreneurship is thriving. Hans, can you tell us about how should we think about VC in China? Introduce us to what you're doing at GGV Capital.
Sure. GGV started in 2000, right after the end of the first bubble of internet. And the premise at that time was to invest in technology markets that we think will matter. And obviously, US was #1 in the world by far at that point in time. And then we started looking at China because we thought China had potential to become a major player. So in 2003, as Sam alluded to, we invested this extremely controversial, very loudmouth entrepreneur who had a very small company back in time called Alibaba. And the valuation we invested in Alibaba was, about 170 million US dollars. And what's the market cap of Alibaba today? 500 billion. And took literally only 14 years to get there. Now, it's impressive to go from 170 million to 500 billion in 13 years. During the same time, the valuation of Google went...
Actually, SoftBank actually did even better.
Even better, yes. Even better.
They invested 20 million
for...
and now it's $100 billion.
That's right. At about $30 million valuation, 2 years earlier, did even better. And so, in the same time, Google grew from about $50 billion in valuation to about 700 billion today. So Google had the rest of the world. Alibaba, up to this point, primarily only in China, can have such a big rise. Jack's an amazing man and the team's amazing, but there's something else fundamental going on in the society, which is what we call Internet Plus, which is that Internet is affecting not just creating a digital economy, but also it's impacting how people live every single day. I remember when I first moved to China from Silicon Valley in 2005, we tried this new website, it was only 2 years old, called Taobao. And on Taobao, when you buy something, you're buying from a seller whom you have never met. And for any of you who have ever been to any flea market in China, you get pestered by merchants all the time. So why would I trust this merchant, one of 15 million selling on Taobao? Well, there are reviews that I can look at. Sure, you can say reviews could be manufactured, but if someone has 1,000, 10,000 reviews, more likely it's legitimate. And then, what if I don't have credit card? And I'm worried about credit card theft in China. So what do? Well, don't worry, because Alibaba came out with a service called Alipay, which means like an escort service, like you buy a house. So if I put money into my Alipay account to the seller, the money sits in the account which the seller cannot touch for 7 days. So if I receive the goods and I don't have any complaint, in 7 days, Alipay will release the payment from my account to the merchant's account. So I don't even know who that person is. I only have to check his or her credit ratings online, and Alipay will make sure that they only release the money after I receive the goods. I have no complaint. So effectively, without any credit card, without any sort of trust, without any kind of prior experience with the merchant, transaction is done. And by the way, a transaction was free. And it didn't cost the merchant any money to have Alipay service. And since it was free, everybody started using it, both on the seller side and the buyer side. And when we moved to China in 2005 with my wife, there was literally not much e-commerce going on. There's some, because eBay bought Internet and Alibaba introduced Taobao, so there's some initial market share. But as opposed to retail, it was less than 0.1% of retail. Today, e-commerce penetration rate in China, I'm just taking e-commerce alone, is 15%. It's a bigger market than e-commerce in the US. In the US right now, the e-commerce penetration rate as opposed to retail, despite Amazon's amazing dominance, is only 10%. So in literally 12 years, that when I moved to China to now, e-commerce has become much bigger market in China than it is in the US. Alibaba on a Singles Day, November 11th every year, the sales they generate this year about like
168 billion.
So the commerce that they generate in one day was roughly about $25 billion.
$25 billion.
$25 billion is more than Black Friday and Cyber Monday combined in the US, both online and offline. One site in China generates more sales in one day than 2 days in the US, online and offline in retail. That's how much impact internet has made just on e-commerce alone in China. So when you have the whole society changing because of backward infrastructure, because of backward sort of offline economy, not as efficient as possible, they have internet come along and just make it a lot easier. Alipay did not need a government funding to do Alipay. It was the ingenuity of the Alibaba team. Ali team did not need to work government approval or support to work with countless merchants to recruit them online. Government did not get any subsidy to go join Alibaba. The government did not pay for any logistic players that work with Alibaba to make sure that they can accept Alipay, they can accept cash transactions. All that happened because the team was thoughtful and aggressive. One of the podcasts we're launching with Kaiser as a co-producer is called 996. Most internet teams in China work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. A lot of founders work 12 to 12, midnight to midnight, 7 days a week. They think about startup every single day, even when they're sleeping. If anybody in the US was come to China or working similar speed, I think they will have a chance. Otherwise, it will be tough.
I would also add to that the technology has been really fundamental to enabling these kinds of transactions and volume when it comes to e-commerce in China.
Sure.
If you think about the volume of transactions that a company like Alibaba has to process, I think it's something like at peak time, it was almost 300,000 transactions per second.
Per second.
And Visa, it's 24,000.
That's right.
Now, to be fair, maybe Visa does not have the same opportunity to test the ability to process that kind of scale. I don't know. But there's certainly an important component of technology enabling this. And I think we're going to see much more of that as AI becomes ubiquitous in these different business lines.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to shift the conversation to OFO because we're really lucky to have David here as an example of someone who is coming from one of these emerging companies in China and is here in the US. And this is an example of a company that is not just in China successful, but is really making an aggressive global push and has become ubiquitous in a lot of different US cities. Can you tell us the story of sort of how OFO came to be, where you see the company going?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you again for having me on the panel. I think with OFO, we were created almost 4 years ago now. It's the classic story that you commonly hear here in the United States about a startup. I mean, we've heard about the stories, in Silicon Valley, a company being founded in a garage, or in Seattle, a company being founded in a garage or in a house. We actually started 4 years ago because of one particular idea that we wanted to actually have. Our founders wanted to have transportation to the last mile for students on campus. He didn't see the reason why everybody couldn't have a bike to go to where they wanted to go, whether that be on campus or off campus. So they came up with the idea of OFO. So it started, actually, let me take a step back. How many of you in the audience has actually used OFO or dockless biking before?
Wow.
Wow, that's more than I expected.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, actually, for those of you who are not familiar with the product, I'll make really quick to explain how it works. So I think everybody's familiar with docking bikes. And so in many cities, we have docking bikes, which you actually have to pick up a bike at a docking station, and you have to return it to another docking bike station. Well, what's different with OFO and some of our competitors is that this is all dockless,
And so you go to a bike. First of all, you download our app, and if you have not done that, please encourage you to do that.
Please do.
We have a great app. And then you will find with our app a map which shows all the different OFO bikes in a particular area. And once you find out, okay, there's a bike on the corner of Rhode Island and Massachusetts, you walk over there with your app. You get a QR code. It comes up on your app, and you unlock the bike. And it's yours for the day or however long you need it. The cost is $1 an hour, and you're allowed to take the bike around the city. Now, for instance, here in Washington, D.C., we actually have 400 bikes that are on the street in Washington, D.C., part of their pilot program. And once you're done with the bike, you return the bike to where you need to. It does not necessarily have to be at a docking station or a bike rack, as long as it's out of the public right-of-way and it's an area that's safe and conducive to the local laws. You return it there, you lock the bike up, and then you're on your merry way. It gives greater convenience for individuals, across the cities, and it serves that last mile of transportation. Now, how we got, oh, by the way, we have a great promotion going on, so I'll say this in Washington, D.C. They would kill me if I did not say this, but we actually have some bikes, I think, out front. If you have not tried it since you're here in Washington, D.C., please give it a ride. We're running free promotions all this month, so it would be great if you wanted to give it a shot. How we got founded, as I said, was in Beijing. University students wanted to get to that last mile. And so they decided to create a system where anybody could pick up a bike on campus and take it anywhere they want. So if you think about some of the user experiences that individuals may have had at that particular time, you come to the campus, you want to go to go to a different place, and your bike is not there, it's been stolen, So what we decided to do is actually create a system where you can have bikes through the mobile app, as I mentioned before, and get that bike and go to pick that bike up and take it to where you need it to be. It was founded on the campus at Peking University. The individuals that were able to actually do this scaled it to over 200 universities across China in a short period of time. 2 years later, the team spread it out to urban areas across China, and it was a growing phenomenon. Which was great about the product. It was really student-driven. It was one of those stories that actually was created in China, and the product that came out of China, the idea that came out of China. And where we are today, we have over 200, we're in actually 200 cities across the world. We are actually in 20 countries across the world. We do over 35 million trips per day on our bikes across the world.
Which is 5 times the amount that Uber does on an average day, by the way.
How many total units now?
Gosh, man, I got to double check that. But yeah, we're
You
real
basically
expanding.
solved the steel overcapacity problem for China.
No more of a supply of steel.
They're very durable bikes.
Yeah, and we're doing an awesome job. It's actually getting bikes out to consumers. I mean, this is a growing phenomenon, but it's more importantly, it's allowing individuals to have choices. Because OFO, when we founded the company, our founders said at the end of the day, we want to make sure that individuals have choices in transportation. And just having that available to citizens across the world, I think it's been beneficial to us.
Also, best logo ever.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
The name's,
Well, the logo, I think, is also very international in nature. And one of the things that I've heard from the folks that I've talked to on your team is that the company was really founded with an idea from the beginning to be an international company. The name OFO wouldn't need to be translated in multiple languages. The logo is something that is accessible.
yeah, it's a guy riding a bike. Oh,
Right,
yeah.
right. But I think that this brings us to another important point. There are some that say China's internet companies can either succeed inside China or they can succeed overseas, but they cannot do both. And I think we're beginning to see some examples of breaking that trend, but it's going to be very challenging. And so I'm wondering if we can shift the conversation now to talking about some of the challenges that Chinese companies are going to face as they begin to look globally. We've talked about some data issues. Just last week, Ant Financial's bid to acquire MoneyGram was rejected by CFIUS, and in large part because of concerns of access to personal information data on Americans by the Chinese government. A lot of sensitivities around data privacy. This is a hot debate in China right now. I think a lot of people assume that if you're in China, all of your data necessarily goes to the Chinese government from Chinese internet companies. My sense is that it's a lot more nuanced than people are giving that debate credit to be. I was just in China last month, had some very interesting conversations about how China's data regime and data privacy in particular is shaping out. I think there's a lot of debate on this. Paul and I are going to be publishing a piece in the next week or so, which is going to delve into some of that debate in more detail. But I'm wondering, actually, can we turn the conversation back to Shenfang and talk about what is Alibaba thinking in terms of global expansion? You know, you're here this week to go to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. What are you all thinking to sort of get out of that event? How are you thinking about global expansion, particularly in an area where I think there's a lot of debate around these issues?
Yeah, globalization. I think Hans already mentioned the e-commerce already 15% of the whole trading on the China.
Yeah.
So it's kind of reaching saturation point. So the next natural step for the
It'll be bigger. You never know.
Yeah. So the natural step will be the globalization. So of the including the Alibaba and the Tencent, also Baidu, all the other rest, including OFO. So what Alibaba think? Alibaba actually globalization in multiple front, and not only not only in the e-commerce and mobile payment, but also the cloud. Right, so I'm going to the CES, tomorrow, but I think the mainly things is that you have the Internet things, the hardware, and behind in the cloud you do the cloud computing, AI, and the big data. So same thing, we will do supporting all the internet company, internet things company, and to do the cloud computing. So that a lot of the internet things will be purchased not only in China, but also of course in China is already a huge market, and not only purchased by inside of China, but also globally. So we will go and pushing pretty aggressively in terms of the supporting the cloud computing. But all the data actually is and stay in its own country. For example, we have the cloud, the center, data center in almost single country, in the Germany and the U.S., in the West Coast, and also in the East Coast. So, and also all the data will be closely related to the user IDs. So, if you look at the data center and all the data is coming in, you look at it, we are the Ali Cloud, and it's just like the AWS and Azure. So we are the bank safety box, and we do not own the data. The data is still belong to the individual consumers, and also we will comply to all the local laws. The U.S. law, the German laws, every European law, every single laws. And so we cannot, and we of course we will providing all the necessary tools, and of course the necessary to process the data, and also secure the data. Those two different tools. So when we providing the tool to process the data, that means we look at the data at all. The tools, that means which is software, is running automatically. So and it running at the instruction of the consumer itself, singly, and it works exactly same like the AWS and Azure.
Paul, you've been looking at global expansion of Chinese companies as well. Any thoughts you want to throw into the conversation there?
Yeah, I think you've raised a couple of them. The issue of how Chinese companies succeed outside of China is a big issue. We talked a little bit about the advantages of home field advantage earlier. I think what the reality is now is there's a much more difficult policy and regulatory environment globally. So as Chinese companies like Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu are running data centers and beginning to expand their operations globally, the policy and regulatory environment both in China and sort of dealing with the outside world becomes much more complicated. So I think we're still sort of in the early stages of this discussion about data and how to handle data. So for example, under the new Chinese cybersecurity law, there are two major pieces that have sort of a global implications for companies, and that is the Network Products and Services Cybersecurity Review and the cross-border data flow issue, and both of these pieces of the cybersecurity law are very unsettled, shall we say, because I think the problem is that China is grappling with how do we set up a regulatory regime in China that is interoperable globally. So I think the key term here is interoperable. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a very complex issue to unravel, because for example, in the EU and the US case, to set up something called Privacy Shield, this took many years of discussion and agreement on standards and best practices and how to handle two different regulatory systems that were very different, had very different starting points on data privacy, but the goal ultimately was to find that interoperability. And I think China now is in sort of the beginning stages of that. We saw this in Wuzhen. So I was just talking earlier to Kaiser that one of the things I found fascinating about Wuzhen was the opening speech by Wang Huning, a senior PBSC member, actually mentioned the term cross-border data flows, okay? And I was a little bit shocked by this, but this shows that I think the senior Chinese leadership is very concerned about this digital economy issue and getting the pieces of the digital economy right, and particularly the international piece. How do Chinese companies operate globally? How is data transferred in a way that is acceptable to regulatory watchdogs in Europe, who are, for example, now putting in place the pieces of the General Data Protection regulation, which is a big issue. We have written a lot about that in my company. We have a lot of clients that are dealing with these issues. So I think the interesting time is that as Chinese companies are really pushing out globally, there are regimes out there that are sort of coming into place, like the GDPR. Chinese regulators have shown interest in other things like the cross-border privacy rules of APEC. So there are a lot of best practices out there that are under study by regulators. And I think, again, in 2018 will be a critical year for China in terms of figuring out how this interoperability works at the global level. And there'll be lots of really good examples as Alibaba and others are operating in Europe and operating in the US and servicing customers there and dealing with their data, and how do regulators view this. So I think 2018 is a very critical year. So we're sort of at this inflection point now, I think, and we'll see a lot of discussion of this. There was a lot of discussion of this at Wujian, and there'll be even more discussion of this in the coming months.
I would just say that my main takeaway here is a lot of the times in the US, when we hear discussions of data in China, there's this assumption that data localization is just de facto in all sectors and is already being implemented.
Right.
And the main message that I would caution observers to take away is that's actually this is really under debate right now in China. The government is weighing this interest of Chinese companies that are going global and that need to be interoperable, as Paul said, and that there are different sectors that are probably going to be treated differently. So I would just caution everyone to just realize this is still very much under discussion, and it's a much more multifaceted picture than some might think. But Kaiser, did you want to?
Let me just add one thing.
Yeah.
The other critical piece of discussion is the definition of critical information infrastructure.
Yes.
And this is one of these things that is also being debated as part of the cybersecurity law, and China is trying to determine how to define critical information infrastructure. Every country does it differently. There was a big discussion again of this in Wujian, where the decision was there was some discussion of that China would narrow, for example, the definition of critical information infrastructure. So some of these things are tied together. So there's data privacy, critical information infrastructure, cross-border data flows. They're all related, and I think getting those things right is where we're in the middle of a major discussion of how to do that.
The reason critical infrastructure is important is that as the cybersecurity law is written now, it is only data that would be data that falls under the scope of critical information infrastructure data that technically would be required to be localized in China. Now, the definition itself of critical information infrastructure is highly debated. So that's where we are now, and that's why these pieces are very interlocking, and we can't sort of figure out the answer until we understand all of these other definitions, which are still in play. I don't know, Kaiser,
Yeah, so the regulatory piece of this is obviously extremely important. And I would say just more broadly, these operating companies, they really haven't given a whole lot of thought to the sorts of regulatory environments that they're going to be encountering, or even more broadly to politics in other countries. I remember in 2012 when we were getting ready at Baidu to launch in a couple of near-to-home markets, for example, in Vietnam, when I argued myself blue in the face with a very talented VP of engineering who was put in charge of launching a suite of products, and who wanted to do this, and it happened to be on the day of gigantic anti-Chinese protests in Vietnam. They're clueless about this. I mean, trying to roll out products in Japan, and at the same time putting these stridently nationalistic doodles on the front page on Zhouyaoba, on Chinese the day of commemoration of the beginning of Japanese aggression. And it's about the disputed Diaoyu Islands. I mean, there's a lot of sort of cluelessness about this. I'd also say that there is a way in which the very things that have made Chinese companies in the consumer internet market so very successful, their deep integration with systems in China, that handicap them when they try to go abroad. I mean, it is not a trivial thing to be able to replicate in other markets. Mm-hmm. And finally, the other thing is that you got to think of it. I mean, this is beginning to change, and maybe as you were suggesting, you're approaching saturation. But I still think of it as internet companies as like bands of Ice Age hunters who are really, really good at bringing down woolly mammoths. In fact, they've brought down a lot of woolly mammoths, and they really are maybe need to be more concerned with how to skin and preserve the meat and fight off the vultures and the other carrion scavengers. And there's a lot of this meat. And if one guy stands up and goes, hey, there's a herd of reindeer over there, they look pretty tasty, but we have no idea how to hunt reindeer, we don't know how to preserve their meat, we don't know anything about the technologies of bringing down these reindeers, we don't know how they respond to fire, whether they can be spooked over cliffs like we've been doing with the mammoths. They need to actually stay focused. And I think investors realize this, and they do not reward a lot of adventure abroad. They're actually say, focus on your domestic market. I think Hans just did that just now. You're saying, well, we still think there's a lot of growth right.
I think both are happening. I think in China, I definitely think that e-commerce penetration rates versus retail would be a lot bigger than 15%. Internally, we think that.
I agree with you.
Yeah. So
both are happening.
Both are happening.
There's challenges.
And there are not that many successful examples of Chinese company going abroad making it work. I think Ofo could be one of them. Mobike could be one of them in the bike sharing world. Also, we were investor in a company called Musical.ly. For those of you that have kids in middle school, over the last few years, Musical.ly has been incredibly popular. Almost everyone has played it. They may only play for 6 months, a year, which they play longer, but they have tried it. And that app was completely developed in China, in Shanghai, by a Chinese team that consists of people who worked in Silicon Valley before and ended up going back to China to do this. And this company was acquired by another company in China called ByteDance that has a famous app in China called Toutiao, which means headline news. And that company, ByteDance, started in Beijing in 2012. And as of recently, they are rumored that the company is worth over $22 billion, if not higher. Wow. And so in a short amount of time, not only did they do well in China, they also expanded beyond China in other parts of Asia. And with this Musical.ly acquisition, they're now in the US market and other things. So in social media, where we haven't seen the WeChats of the world be as aggressive to expand globally, especially outside of Asia, we see a younger generation of entrepreneurs, whether it's the David at Ofo or Yiming at ByteDance. Their average age is roughly about 35 to 40 years in age, some even younger, as young as 32 or early 30s, like Ofo.
David is under 30.
That's right. So most of them are in that age group where they are more global minded, even though the English may be limited. They dare to think bigger and try more. So they will go through some of the growing pains that Kaiser has pointed to for sure. But I think the desire to become more global is definitely stronger than before. And they know that outside of China is a different market, but increasingly they can recruit locally of people that have done well, like right here, industry veteran here in the Silicon Valley to join them. So you will see a more sort of United Nations team emerging, not only in China, but also in US. We're investing in Airbnb, and we help Airbnb actively to go into China. And we're seeing that more and more teams in the US are having more diversity, whether it's along gender or along ethnic lines, to have more different perspective. To become a more global company, and that's a great thing as a VC to see.
Hans, I have a question about Musical.ly, because something I just don't understand about it is it's a company that was developed in China, has done really well overseas, but has not done so well in China yet.
Right.
And yet it's a live streaming video company. Isn't live streaming something that's really taken off in China and is like a multi-billion-dollar industry?
Right.
Why? What's going on there?
It's in China, it's a tough market. So the more westernized you are, you may not be as adept at fighting locally in China. It's two different worlds. The coastal cities, whether Shanghai and Beijing, are very, you have a lot of westernized elements. But as you go inland, it becomes increasingly need to be more localized to fight. So the Musical.ly team is good at building a global company, but they're not as aggressive in China. What's the term aggressive? Well, in order to fight Musical.ly in China, ByteDance came up with 3 apps. Each of them does something slightly different and the same as Musical.ly. So they were able to figure out a way to surround Musical.ly on different levels, even copying some of the videos that users generated on Musical.ly on purpose on their own app to get more Chinese users to try it. The aggressiveness, how they moved, and also the technology that they built. They recruit a lot of people from Baidu, to join their team. And then so the AI algorithm capability of ByteDance was significantly better than Musical.ly. So the level of aggressiveness that we have seen in Chinese teams just get better and better and better. And that's something that doesn't have anything to do with government control.
I want to shift the conversation for a moment to talk more about some of your personal experiences working at these companies and going back and forth between China and the US. And Shenfang, you've worked for Intel and for Huawei here in the US and then decided to go back and go to Alibaba back in China after many years doing that. You know, what was your decision to go back and work in China for Alibaba, and what has that transition been like?
What's the decision and what's the experience? The experience is extremely different, extremely different. So just Hans talked about it. It's the people in China, they work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. So actually, I like 9/11. I work from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. So 6 days a week. So, and a lot of time actually, if counting all the flights, traffic, a lot of time I arrive in a new hotel at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning. So then sleep and then wake up at 8 a.m. Then you go to another meetings. So if in counting that, it will probably be 9 to 1 o'clock.
So why did you decide to go back
Why
and do that?
Why do you want a worse lifestyle?
Yeah, exactly. That's the biggest question, actually. So, I think why I need decide to go back is kind of like a more personal choice, and I have a bigger the business to carry on, right? So and a bigger responsibility to be able to and I can achieve what I want to do, and I have more freedom to and more resource I can driving things to get it done. But I think the key thing actually in Silicon Valley today, so it's so competitive, and it's worldwide competitive stage. It's like NBA. Yao Ming can play in the NBA really well, but not everybody can like Yao Ming play in NBA. So and the China internet economy, like a CBA in the China Basketball Association, that it offers a lot of opportunity for people like me to to get their own dream realized.
And David, you just started at a Chinese company after being at eBay and Cisco. So what has that transition been like to go to a Chinese startup?
Yeah, interesting. When I look sort of like at those two companies, which are great companies as well. I mean, at Cisco, I first joined, it was after 16 years of Cisco being a new company. So I joined them in the late 90s, right during the dot-com era. And then the dot-com bubble came, and then things changed pretty quickly. So that teenager had to grow up really fast. But I think one of the things that was great about Cisco invested in their people. They invested in broadband and invested in some of the technologies that we're using to this day. We don't see a lot of them, but they actually are there. eBay was a little bit different as well. eBay was a 10-year-old company when I joined eBay. So I went from a teenager to elementary schooler, I think about 5th grader. And eBay was really still pushing the cutting edge of e-commerce at that particular time. eBay was doing a lot of investments internationally and domestically, et cetera, but also too at that particular time, the e-commerce market was starting to mature, and a lot of the players were sort of falling out, and had some great leadership there at eBay as well. I think with OFA, which is so incredible about being there, and I've been there literally, I think it's 6 weeks I've been there at the company, is that we are a startup, number one, but a startup with actually looking to headquarters for a lot of guidance and sort of a lot of direction. So if you think about it, we're not the typical startup. We just didn't start, yesterday. I mean, this company's been around for 4 years, but here in the United States, we haven't even been here in the United States we've been here less than a year so far. And so we have a great opportunity to learn from corporate in Beijing about exactly what they went through when they started getting into new markets, what they sort of saw when they first were getting into college campuses, and having that type of guidance, from corporate headquarters back here, because we're very much in the startup mode, here in the United States. We're breaking stuff, we're doing all the things that you think of a typical startup that does. And I think what's great about where we sort of are is that we are sort of pushing the edge, but we have the guidance from the grown-ups, back at headquarters to sort of help guide us through some of the challenges that we will have. And we'll continue to be very aggressive here in the United States. But one of the things I think, from a political or policy standpoint, which I think is very unique about where we are, individuals in my profession very rarely get an opportunity to be on the front end of a company. Usually they call public policy professionals in, usually when a company's in trouble, or we need to help the company grow in certain areas. But we're here on the infant stages, being able to help the company grow. We are integral to business development here in the United States. And I think for us and for individuals that are in my field, it's real exciting. It is hard charging, it's fun, it's exciting, but at the same time, we have a lot of work to do here in the United States. So I think you're going to see us be very aggressive in the coming months, but also too, at the same time, we're going to make sure we're going to do this right. And I think seeing where those other companies were, where we are going right now, it's just fascinating place to be.
Sam, let me answer that previous question a little one more sense. Actually, the biggest challenge for the internet company of China to globalization is not the regulation or laws, but all the cultures. And understanding the local, just like Kaiser said, the Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, those guys deeply understand the China culture. But they do not deeply understand the U.S. culture. They do not deeply understand. That's taking away their competitive edge.
How successful is Huawei's push to enter the U.S. high-end smartphone market going to be? They've invested a ton in just trying to study U.S. consumers and in branding. So are they going to be able to do it?
Well, I think the key challenges, I think for the Huawei, for their the Huawei phone, wasn't too successful is because the heavy subsidies of the carriers. But now there's no more subsidies for the iPhones. AT&T do not subsidize. You have to buy $600 or $700. So now it's for the Huawei, they no longer need to rely on, because when you go to AT&T, you give us $400, $500 subsidy to the iPhone. Then when the consumer buying either Huawei phone or the iPhone will be think twice, right? So this is $600, $200. But now it's all you can buy online. It's the same price and much cheaper, and the same performance.
Well, I think that's a good point, the same performance. But I think the one quick note here, the Huawei, the new Huawei, the Mate 10 has the Kirin 970 AI processor in there, which I gather is as good as, I don't know, I have the iPhone 10 here. But when I talk to a lot of people about this, the sense is the hardware is pretty good, but it's sort of that software layer and the integration layer that Apple does so well. And so Huawei may be a little behind on that, but people I've talked to who've used the Huawei phone are very impressed.
Well, I think Paul, I want to add that and echo on the OFO thing, right? So the software running in all the Android phones did a great innovation. What's the so-called innovation inside Android did called the hardware abstraction layer. It would allow to all the hardware interoperable each other, including GPS, including telecom, including all the RFID for the mobile payment. So that's why OFO can realize their application, make their bike dockless, because of the GPS and mobile processor can work together. So the same thing for the Huawei, they have called the AI processor chip in the benchmark is the 2.4 operas, operating per second. So and versus Apple, they only 0.5 OPS. So the TOPS, teleop. So what I think that it's not only today. If you look at using Huawei phone and versus iPhone, Huawei phone give you the same performance, but with a much longer battery process time, and that's what Apple need to work on a little bit.
I'll agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Before I open it up to questions from the audience, do any of you have any final comments you want to make?
Eager to hear what they have to say.
All right, please, let's take some questions from the audience. Here in the front.
Thank you for an extraordinary conversation this morning. I have a sort of an oddball question. We've all watched the Arnold Schwarzenegger Predator movies years ago, where artificial intelligence leaps and becomes conscious. And that seemed very far-fetched back in the 80s and 90s. But now a lot of really senior people in the whole IT area are saying, you know what, this is really something, not now, but 20 years from now, 25 years from now, it really could happen. These are people who are really, really far brighter than I am. What do you guys think about that?
So I've had the privilege of working very close to people who are luminaries in the field of AI, and They've got some glib responses to that when Elon Musk or when even Bill Gates talks about the armies of killer robots. Andrew Ng, who was the head of AI at Baidu for a few years, he would say, look, and this is directly at Elon, worrying about armies of killer robots right now is a little bit like worrying about overpopulation on Mars. We're not even there yet. Humans have not yet set foot on Mars, and to worry about a problem, now that is not to say that one day we may not face that issue. Now that said, I think that it is it's a glaring omission on the part of you do not hear conversations about not just these far-fetched sci-fi scenarios, but about the ethics, the ethical conundrums that are going to be posed very, very soon by AI, except from a few people. We were just talking about this earlier, and Sean admits that, well, we all think about just our own personal individual KPIs. We need to hit our numbers every quarter, and nobody is thinking about the ethical ramifications of self-driving cars on this planet. Of 7.5 billion people, of us 500 million people drive vehicles for a living. And in 40 years, unless you are driving an electric rickshaw in Bangladesh, you're probably out of a job. There's serious issues that there were only a handful of people who were wrestling with this. People like Kai-Fu Lee. We can all agree he's thinking thoughtfully about this.
Yeah, actually, let me explain a little bit artificial intelligence. And people have a lot of misunderstanding, and I think Elon Musk intentionally, confusing people, I have to say, and including Bill Gates. There is no intelligence at all in the machines today. It's no intelligence. That's why I call it artificial. So it's just computing power. It's the same computing power we have in the x86 for the last 40 years. The same today. It's just we just had more data, we had more computing power, we have more storage. And it looks like today the computer can do things we can not do before the computer do. And you can, for example, do the face recognition, right? For the voice recognition. And the computer can do the face recognition more accurate than the human eye. It doesn't mean the computer have the intelligence today, just like I am. I have the imagination.
But even that is highly problematic. I mean, look at how it's being used right now, how it's being deployed. It's positively Orwellian.
Well, I don't worry about that at all, because
that's the problem. You're not worrying about it.
Let me explain why. Let me explain why. Because Watt invented the steam machine, and the Edison invented the lamp. What problem created for us? Nothing. You can make it much better.
I would challenge
and the
that.
same thing, and Intel created a microprocessor. It made our life better.
Nobel invented high explosives. There was a gentleman who also learned how to fix nitrogen for fertilizer. He also invented gas used in the trenches in World War I. We've had a lot of technologies that are potentially very dangerous. Another one is CRISPR-Cas9, this really sophisticated gene editing technology. You do not hear coming out in public discourse in China real conversations about the potential for serious problems that could be brought to society.
Yeah,
I
I think that real or displaced individuals, what people out there think that technology, IoT, the world of robots is going to take over. A lot of people believe that that's going to happen. Real or imagined, a lot of people believe that, and I think it's incumbent upon us, in our industry, to educate the public about exactly what IoT is, what the robots of the future look like, what self-driving vehicles look like. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be us, on this stage, and those of you out there are the big proponents of it, to educate the general public. Because without that, then we get into the whole displacement argument. And once that happens, we're down that road. We're right back where we are currently with our current trade debate in this country. So I think we could do that.
Yeah, no, these are all good points. I just wanted to, just specifically to your question, I think there's two different issues. One is job displacement, technology advancing and displacing jobs, and the pace of that, and how fast that will happen, and how fast we can retrain people. And then the other issue is artificial general intelligence or artificial superintelligence, and that's what Elon and the other and Mark Cuban and others. It's a great debate. I mean, it's interesting. Sam Harris weighs in on this, but I think that that's what most experts believe is 20, 30, 40 years off, and that's a whole other issue of how that's pursued, and is it something, I think people are worried that that's going to be pursued somehow in secret, and then Russia, Putin has said this, well, if whoever develops the first AGI is going to win, right? But I think that the mistake in that is that, as we see with artificial intelligence in general, it's really, it's very open. There's open source, there's a lot of collaboration, and I have a hard time believing that a small group in secret is going to develop those capabilities or develop something that we're going to recognize as AGI without people knowing about it, or it's going to be an incremental process where maybe at some point the machines will have some small amount of intelligence as we combine some of these technologies. But that's going to be an iterative and process which I think we'll be able to cope with if the regulatory structure is adjusted to this. I mean, this debate has already started in the U.S. Last year, the Obama administration issued 2 really good reports about AI and how to think about this. China, in its national AI plan last summer, had a big section in there on labor. Thinking about how to develop a regulatory structure so that to mitigate both the sort of societal effects, the bad effects in terms of job displacement, and then also I think beginning to engage in a more global dialogue on how the whole issue is approached from a societal level. And so I think that debate is starting, but I think the Predator and all these other, the media and the movie industry, there's plenty of great examples of the bad AI taking over. But I think those are, and it's good to think about those, and I think that helps to push the debate forward. I would recommend Black Mirror if you haven't watched it as a
very
show.
good.
Some great stuff
Worth
on there.
watching.
It's way out in front on this, and also the show Humans is also a fantastic show, which really deals in a very sensitive way with AI and how we treat AI going forward.
Stay tuned, because we're writing a China AI report in the next 6 months, so maybe we'll get a bunch of you guys back to delve deeper into AI specifically. Next question. The woman in the front here.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Ding. Can you tell us what kind of conversations are taking place inside of Alibaba about the societal consequences about generating so much data? So you talked about how it's exciting for scientific progress and for business opportunities, but unlike the light bulb, like you just mentioned, there are real privacy and surveillance issues that are tied with IoT. So could you talk about that, please?
So can you define your little bit questions? But I feel there is no impact. It's all positive impact for the human society at all. So I don't feel anything. As a scientist, seriously. So I feel why even come up with that question?
There's no one inside Alibaba thinking about the consequences, societal consequences.
Societal consequences. What kind of societal consequences could it be?
Privacy.
How about Sesame Credit?
Let me explain that. If the data, right, just like your money, right. So if you put your money in your own private safety box, or you put it in the bank, which side is which way is more safe? And Alibaba, invest billions of dollars to buying all the security software, which manufactured, or designed in most of either U.S. or the Europe. The IDC, the Alibaba operating, or Amazon operating, or Microsoft operating, they can afford billions of dollars of investment on the security software. But if you're running on your own server, how much money you can afford install security, or antivirus software? Almost $10, and I invest $1 billion. So our side, I think you can just compare your own safety box versus the bank's safety box, which is more safety, which way you want to trust, and you put the data in the bank's safety box, make you less hassle, worry-free, right? If you put all your most valuable, it's just like myself. The wedding ring, I don't have that here, but then in the safety box. So the same thing. I don't want to put the safety box in my own home because my home could be on fire, could be flooded, anytime. So, but I trust the bank to do much better job.
That's not what I meant.
Yeah.
See, woman in the middle here.
Yeah, my name's Ying Laori. I'm an economic professor from Tsinghua University. Before I took that job, I worked in America in the universities and the government. So given that kind of background, I just want to do a little bit advertisement. I'm also the author of a book. It's called The Alibaba Way. And this book has been really successful in many ways because it just tells the world Alibaba provide unique business model that is growing by unleashing grassroots entrepreneurship. I felt here when we talk about the digital economy, most people just talk about excitement part. But the most excitement part did not really get attention. That is how this new technology and create or fostering new businesses, millions, billions of businesses, and also creating billions new jobs. I wonder, this is what people told me. Thank you, Professor Laori. You're the only one point out Alibaba, actually it is. Alibaba has that kind of consensus to help business create jobs. And in this country, in our country, America, I'm an American citizen, we need that. I hope, and also I want to know among all of those experts here, what are your efforts in this kind of new model growing by unleashing grassroots entrepreneurship? Thank you.
Good question.
Anyone want to take this?
I'll just take that. I think a lot of VCs are investing in marketplaces. And the definition of marketplace is that someone set up a platform so that buyers and sellers can meet. So you look at Alibaba as a very well-known example of that. eBay started that in the 1990s. And then a company like an Airbnb also made it possible for people with a home to make extra income on the side. But with any of these marketplaces, the challenge is that some of the existing vested interests will be affected. For example, with Airbnb, Hotel Lobby Association is pretty much against it. And there are a lot of people who work inside on hotels. So Hotel Lobby is trying to do more for their efforts. Maybe the employees can rent out their own home as well on Airbnb too at the same time. But the power of marketplaces is what we have seen in the US and China is powerful. And we think that a lot of VCs think that that kind of business model will work in other markets, whether it's in Europe, Latin America, Middle East, Southeast Asia. As these FANGs, Facebook and Google and Amazon, and also the Baidu, the Tencent, Alibaba, and the next generation, including OFO, expand globally, what is very powerful is not only creating jobs, but also training next generation of entrepreneurs to be better, to scale faster, and to see more successful examples that work elsewhere, so that they can take less business model risk and also become more, whether it's richer, more developed, or more evolved sooner, faster. I think that's the power of what we learned from investing in internet in China and US, is that the power of internet marketplaces and of entrepreneurship at a grassroots level is tremendous. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it's hard to imagine in China that any non-government controlled entity can be more valuable and generate more GMV, generate more transactions, generate more impact than state-owned enterprises. Alibaba and Tencent are not controlled by Chinese government, and their market cap in Hong Kong and New York are bigger than any other state-owned enterprise in China. Bigger than CCTV, bigger than China Petroleum, bigger than China Mobile, and bigger than #1 bank, ICBC. Not just hard to imagine 12 years ago in a communist country that the Communist Party could even allow that to happen. And so I think that's the biggest takeaway that I have. And also I think that kind of examples will impact other countries as well.
I actually have a question about that. There was a Wall Street Journal article earlier this fall saying that the Communist Party is going to take a 1% stake in the big internet companies. I, for one, am somewhat skeptical of that. I think it's going to be a lot harder to actually pull off, and there could be a lot of resistance to that from inside the companies, precisely because of these global, it's not going to make global expansion any easier.
Correct.
But I don't know, I wanted to hear what people on the panel thought about that. Is that real or not?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've obviously we have a lot of experience with this. I think all of us who've worked with this. There are two ways to err on the way you approach this. One is to just simply think of Alibaba and other Chinese companies as just thralls of the Chinese government, as basically there's no daylight between their position and they're completely under the control of. That is just simply not true. These are consumer-facing internet companies that understand that they have interests that are quite divergent sometimes from the state's or the party's interests, but neither can we ignore the fact that at the end of the day, they often have to do the bidding. You know, when they don't have all the cards. They can push back, they can assert a modicum of independence, but there's a limit to it, and we need to be realistic. I think that the problem here is that we either see them
black or white,
one way or the other, and it's just not the case.
I mean, I think that there's no question that there's this sort of tug between the government and these companies. It's just a question of, would this be the most effective way if the government's trying to gain more control over the companies? I don't necessarily think this is the best way to do it, or the most efficient way to do it, or the most realistic. So.
Well, it bears remembering that, you know, in the early days of the Chinese internet, if you think about who these people were, who the people who created these big companies are, and where they got their money, these are mostly either returnees or people who are highly westernized, like Jack. A lot of them were returnees. A lot of them were actually green card holders or even U.S. citizens who came back to China. People like Charles Zhang and people.
From Sohu.
And they raised money from American venture capital, and they went to American bourses for
IPO.
Their capital markets. But this whole time, they were operating in an environment where technically foreign investment in Chinese internet companies was not allowed. There was this really sophisticated workaround it's still very, very complicated, the variable interest entity, the VIE structure. But how is this allowed to happen? We're talking about a party state that generally insists on dominating the strategic heights of any important sector. And clearly the internet was I mean, anyone could have seen it was an important sector. It just happened too fast. And so it's been catch up the whole time. It's been things like, oh, well, now we're going to take a 1% stake, or it's just the imposition of censorship regimes and things like that. But they will never run as fast. It's a real interesting dynamic. But that's what we need to remember. I mean, the origins of this.
Zhenfeng, did you want to say anything about that particular point?
So I don't think the 1%, what to do for the government. They need more money? No, right? They can raise the tax anytime, right? Right? They can, raising the internet tax anytime. And also 1% do not give them any more control.
No.
Right.
They already have enough control.
Right. Right. Question here in the front? Second one.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question related to the specific role of Communist Party committees within Chinese internet companies. I know last month, for example, Amazon announced a strategic partnership with a Ningxia company for a cloud server. As part of that press release, I was sort of surprised to see a Communist Party official sort of talking about this great development within the sort of official joint press release. I saw, David, that in October, OFO actually sent a press release to Global Times celebrating its formation of a Communist Party committee within OFO. So what specifically do these Communist Party committees within OFO and even sort of Alibaba, what do they do, and what specific control do they have? Since
we don't have the Communist Party. Alibaba don't have that.
Yes, you do.
There's no Communist Party committee?
There is no Communist Party.
Yes, you do.
I know really well. Actually, it's several internet companies. Yes, it does. Intentionally, they form the Communist Party inside the company.
That's right.
But Alibaba, no.
You do.
I know that.
You have one, Tencent has one, Baidu. Any company that employs more
Well,
than 2,000 people.
I know much better.
Okay, what happens to the Baidu Communist Party committees?
No, I mean, I can talk about that. You know, they actually work often quite closely with our GR department. They have to. They are not very active. They're practically invisible. Most people who are senior in the party in the company know who the party committee chair is. In our case, it was somebody at a quite high level. It was a VP, senior VP, in fact. Zhu Guang was the head of the Baidu party, but they don't actually do much. There's very little that they do, except they'll send an occasional congratulatory note on the establishment, or they're the people that we have to send to these just yawn fests of, to listen to these interminable speeches.
Interminable speeches.
There's really not much that they do, but they do. I mean, they often are involved in the transmission of certain important regulatory and policy decisions.
That's their transmission.
Yeah. That's their it's downward transmission.
It's not a mandatory. It's not.
It is mandatory.
Okay, but it's I know so many other companies they don't have that. Yeah. It's not all. Some of the companies they do want to the police.
Ollie has one. I know.
Okay, let's not debate that. But anyway.
As you can tell, there are different degrees. They're different degrees. Well, not all Communist Party practice the same way, and not all of them take order from the government and say do this, do that. Right. It is a bit overblown. When we invest in any company, whether it's OFO or Mobike, we don't spend a single second on how active the Communist Party committees are inside a company, how they impact decision making, because there's no time for that. Like Kaiser and everyone else said, the Chinese consumer market is moving so fast. If you spend your time worried about how to make Communist Party member happy, make the party happy, you're going to get killed on the battlefield. You won't even exist in another month. Just as an example, when Groupon was popular in the US, after Groupon raised Series B funding in the US, announcement went out to China, within 3 months, 3,000 Groupon companies started. Yet I'm finding 3,000 other competitors. How much time do I have worry about what a Communist Party would do to me? I need to make sure we have a job, and make sure we have a company that we can be alive and running. So there's very little time to think about a Communist Party because you have to fight 3,000 other competitors.
So it's always you'd rather ask forgiveness than ask permission, but that Communist Party cell is a good conduit for asking forgiveness.
Yes, that's a great point.
Martin, did you have a question in the front?
Yeah, sure.
Hi, I'm Martin Chorzempa of the Peterson Institute. I have a question that touches a bit on what Kaiser mentioned, but it's specifically for Hans and anyone else. I'd love to hear what they have to say. And it's about how the financial system in China is different than the US in supporting innovation. Because Kaiser, you mentioned that most of the money came from outside before, and sometimes I get the sense, and excuse the mixed metaphor, that it's like one country, two financial systems.
It is.
Where you have one system that funds state-owned enterprises, very inefficient. A lot of the money that individuals have in deposits is just kind of wasted on these bad projects. But then you have companies like OFO that are and many of the other ride-sharing companies that are able to raise huge piles of cash very early on to create new companies. So I'd love to hear a bit about what that looks like in the U.S. versus China and what your experience is.
If anything, it's the American investors, American LPs, American institutional money who made a lot of money of Chinese internet space. So all the Baidu, Alibaba, OFO, GGV, most of our money come from U.S. institutional LPs. So the people who made the most amount of money out of Chinese internet sector is not Chinese citizens, it's actually U.S. investors. And most people don't ever talk about that. Yeah. But it's true. And so when you also look at the Chinese stock exchange, I think Chinese government realized that the quality of companies on Chinese stock exchange, a lot of them are not as good as they want them to be. So they make a concerted effort, as you're implying, to get the Chinese startups to take RMB funding sources to list in China, so that the quality of the company listed can be a lot better, so that Chinese retail investors can benefit from real growth companies. And so I think over the next decade, you will see more of a rebalancing more companies listing in China. But if you want to raise $1 billion in 1 year, you still have to go to U.S. money sources. Now, SoftBank is going to be a major player, and it is a major player in China, but it's one of many. And most of the funding come from here in the Middle East, obviously.
Right now, it's very hard for a startup to list in China. I mean, there were to be on the Shanghai exchange, you need to show X number of years of profitability, and if you're
most of the companies are not
it's just
profitable.
not even close.
Well,
they're changing that. The new board is supposed to.
Yeah, Kaiser and Hans, let me comment on that. I actually have a different view of the listed in China. Actually, I'd rather list in the NASDAQ.
Yeah, I know you do. It's safer that way.
And two things actually. If you look at the, Hans is working in Silicon Valley. The efficiency of the U.S. VC is 10 times more efficient than the China VCs. RMB VCs. RMB VC on average today, even today, losing money, right? The return is negative. But U.S. currency-based VC, even in China, they make more than 10 times, 10x the return in the last 10 years. Right? More, just we talk about it.
Well, I mean, they're new, right? The RMB funds are still relatively young.
The RMB fund is not only because they're new, because they are stupid money. To be honest, they are a lot of time they are investing in those projects. Hans actually do not invest in them. They think they are a bad project. It's like 3,000.
I think 10 years ago in China, most people thought you need to have guanxi, you need to have government relationship, you need to have local government support, all that to make money as an investor. So when the American VC moved to China and work in China to be investing on the ground, a lot of people are skeptical that you can invest in internet and make money. Obviously, in the last 10 years, things changed dramatically when you have, example like Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent. So if anything, the kind of debate that we hear in China about internet is like it is very positive, less worried about privacy. Sure, people think about privacy it could be improved, but the quality of life changed so much in the last 10 years that most people tend to focus on the positive aspects. I'm not saying that should continue in the next 10 years, because we should be mindful of what technology can do. But for the immediate future, as long as you have a sort of gap for Chinese living standard versus, say, Japan, the gap, most Chinese companies focus more on narrowing that gap. I remember when I first went to Tokyo in 2007, 2008, I looked at a subway map of Tokyo, there are like 26 lines. About 8 million people take subway in Tokyo every single day. About 37 million people take high-speed rail to go into Tokyo to work every day. When I saw that in 2007, 2008, my first reaction was that is what China will look like, especially among the top 100 cities in the next 10 years. I don't worry about that. This is Japan, this is China, they don't like each other, all that, World War II, all that stuff. What I know is that is a model that in China we need to do to catch up in the next 10 years. And now in Beijing and Shanghai, you go to the subway system, there are over 20 lines, and there are about 9 million people. 9 million people take subway in Beijing every single day today. So in 10 years, you caught up, surpassed Tokyo. What Chinese companies think about, even the Communist Party think about, is that we are behind, we need to catch up. How soon can we do that? That's the single most focus. That's why we all want to work longer time. 12 to 12 or 7 to 7, whatever the number is. We feel that we can change history. We can do so much in such a short period of time that it is invigorating. And we look at the history of China from 4,000, 3,000 years to now, there are not that many moments in time where you have a chance to make a difference. And this is the reason why we love what we do, despite the long hours.
We have time for one more question, and then we can continue the conversation informally after.
Thank you very much. An excellent panel and discussion. I wanted to ask you, with respect to that, China is very concerned about catching up, and there's the Made in China 2025 and Internet Plus. What positive role is there if the technology is changing so quickly? And as you sort of explained, they have tremendous competition inside, outside, and the regulators can't keep up. So what use is that for the development of this high-tech industry in China, and how would you compare that, let's say, with the US, where there is no government organization or orchestration? The market works by itself, but the market has lots of imperfections.
I think that's a general view, but if you look at the experience of OFO, and you can share with them more. Bike sharing in China actually is easier to scale than it is in the US. Why? Because in the US, you have the dock bike sharing program already. So every regulator in the US, in every city, has to evaluate if this is good for my city or not. So they take time. And they want to see if other city will try it first, what's the result of that? Then they study. So the pace of rolling out in the US, whether it's for a land bike, which is homegrown in Silicon Valley, but borrowing model from China, or a mobile or OFO, is a lot slower in the US than in China. In China, within a 1 year period, each of the major 2 or 3 bike sharing company ends up having over 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million bikes per company in 1 year. So I think what the Chinese government is doing differently is that they were willing to let you try first, see how you want to do, how it's working for you. Then they figure out how they want to regulate you later. So it's the opposite of the American way. And what most people don't understand, since we have the fortune of investing in both markets, is that the Chinese government actually is behaving more like American government from 20 years ago. And the American government behaving like the Chinese government from 10 years ago. It's unfortunate, but that is the case right now. So the companies in China are moving, scary to say, faster than most Silicon Valley company. I go into the nice offices of Silicon startups in San Francisco. And if I go there after 8 o'clock, no one's there. Everybody is out there doing happy hour and have a good time and chatting. I go to Xiaomi, which is one of the fastest growing smartphone manufacturer and design company in China. I go to Xiaomi to see the CEO at 1 o'clock in the morning. There are 2 other people waiting for him in front of me. So the pace of change is very different. If you don't go there and see it, people wouldn't believe it. You have to go there and see. You look at the mobile payment market in China with WeChat Pay and Alipay, it's 11 times the market size of Apple Pay in the US. How is that possible? When's the last time you used Apple Pay to buy stuff? Maybe for your grandkids, your kids that want something, you download the app using Apple Pay. In China, you go to any offline store now, use WeChat Pay with a QR code, they can scan it, transactions done. You don't even need to bring cash. 5 years ago, is it possible going to China without cash and live a week? Today, it is. If you don't go there and see it, you'll never believe it. We're just smoking crack.
Can I just jump in quickly? I think the Made in China 2025 has been kind of a whipping boy for a lot of people on sort of China's industrial policy. And I think you point out a good point, and I think other panels have made it. So Made in China 25 came with a roadmap, and it was a separate document that was developed by the Chinese Academy of Engineering. And that had very specific kinds of timelines, and particularly, for example, for the semiconductor industry, going out to 2020, 2025, 2030. And I think that has gotten a tremendous amount of attention in the Western media and in academic circles. I think that the challenge is, though, is that these technologies, as the panelists have noted, are going so fast that if you look at the 2014 roadmap in the Made in China 2025 document, it's already been OBE'd by things like AI and AI chips and the moves in data centers towards GPUs. And so already the market conditions have changed tremendously since that roadmap was developed. And so I think something like AI, for example, I see is even more difficult for a sort of national strategy to define and try to catch up. Now, this has happened also with AI. Last summer, the big plan came out. But that, I think, again, was behind the curve. Companies like Alibaba and all the other AI companies in China were already doing many things that are called out in the plan. So then in November, when Most says, here are our 4 national champions, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, iFlyTech, and here's the sectors they're focusing on. Of course, they'd already been doing this for some time. So the government is playing catch up in this.
And most people look at the government plan and say, aha, the government's behind it. Aha, they're supporting this. What's really happening is that these people are going to Alibaba to do research, interviewing. What are you doing? How fast do you think you're growing? So the government actually is collecting data from the private enterprise to figure out what is the national plan. There's no national plan from the top. Yeah. As a VC, I don't spend a single second worrying about what the government's going to do for the sector. Because I know if a company if China wants to stay governed, if companies want to stay in power, the better figure out a way to keep up, the better figure out a way to make sure that people are happy with the economic development. Because if you go to Beijing today, and everybody who goes to Beijing knows the traffic problem in China, and most people who have a car and get a license plate, based on the last digit of a license plate, you cannot drive into CBD twice a week. 5 years ago, you cannot drive into CBD once a week. Why are there restrictions? Because there's just too many cars in China, especially in Beijing. So in Beijing, you have 20 million people, and the car ownership is about 25%. And you already have 2 days a week, you cannot drive a car into the city because there's too many cars. If everybody in Beijing consumed Americans do, which is a 70% car ownership level. That means that the traffic congestion problem in Beijing will multiply by 3 times. That is unbearable. So it doesn't matter if you're communist or you're a Democrat Party, you're a National Party, whatever party you want to call yourself, you better do what the Japanese do, the people in Hong Kong do, the Singaporeans do, have a subway system, have public transportation. Because otherwise, or OFO, or DD. So when we invest in DD and also in bike sharing company, we don't worry about what the government's going to do. Because they have to follow, or else they cannot keep their power. They have to let ride sharing happen, because otherwise the traffic problem will be worse. So as a VC, we look from a sort of national development path to catch up. To stay in power, you have to do X, Y, Z over time. I don't know when, I don't know how, but you just got to do it, or else you cannot keep your power. So we invest based on our logic and are willing to invest in something that's disruptive, because we know that's good for nation building.
Look, I largely agree, but let's not be too cavalier here. I mean, and there is a role that the government will still play.
That's your job. That's the GR, government relations job of each company. They have to hire the best people to be able to manage the government.
In things like in face recognition technology, you think that the face recognition would be as robust as it is in China if one of the main customers was not public security? No, of course not. I mean,
that's fine.
Right, that's fine. It's also problematic, right? I mean, at least from a value system that here in the West, it is problematic.
And in China, I think most VCs or government officials or entrepreneurs probably don't worry too much of how the Americans are going to look at it, because they just go.
And speaking of that, Shenfeng, I think you wanted to.
So, and I just want to echo on the industrial 2025. So actually, internet plus economy, we already talked about. Actually, internet already digitized almost every segment of the consumer, including payment, including dining, including bike, including cars. And 40% of China GDP is manufacturing, and it is $5 trillion, and there is tremendous efficiency need to be increased. They're using internet. So let's take, let's GE think, if we can use the internet technology, AI, big data, cloud, to increasing the 1% efficiency of the $5 trillion, that will be $50 billion. $50 billion. But China, I believe, could be more than 10%. That will be $500 billion. And you can think about it. $500 billion revenue can be 100 company,
right?
And 100 new startup in the company.
And
it will be the same thing happening in the US.
At the end of the day, the internet company and Chinese government have a symbiotic relationship. The government is all powerful in China to some extent until they lose power. So when they're in power, you have to deal with them. And the way to do it, quite frankly, is to be needed so the government needs you. Whether it's the internet sector generating more jobs than the SOEs and the offline economy, whether it is the Chinese internet company be able to go abroad and therefore make Chinese government feel good, that Chinese soft power is being extended, whatever the goal is, I think the internet companies can do better than the SOEs can, and that's the only reason Chinese government tolerates internet company. So nobody is naive. It is based on a mutual dependency. So to be the only way you can keep your rights is not because you are right to keep your rights. The only way you keep your rights is because you're strong enough and you are useful enough that you are allowed to keep your rights. And that's a daily struggle.
And speaking of useful enough, I mean, we've thrown around a lot of numbers today about just how big the scale of all of this is, but I think something that really drove it home for me when we were visiting Shenfeng on the Alibaba campus, and there's 3 big statues outside the campus, and all of their heads are looking down, and we said, why are all of their heads looking down? And the answer was because people at Alibaba are focused on solving real-world problems. And I think that this is something really important to keep in mind when we're thinking about innovation in this economy, and the idea of solving real-world problems, creating more efficiency is a big driver of innovation in all of this. With that, we're over time, so we're going to have to close. Thank you all so much. Look for our next report coming in the next few months. I think we have one on China's autonomous vehicles, AI. The series will continue, so thanks for a great conversation today.
Good.